Debate underway. Order.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Il me fait plaisir d'avoir l'occasion de parler de nouveau du projet de loi C-309. Pour ceux d'entre vous qui ne le connaissaient pas, peut-être pas bien, le projet de loi C-309 propose d'établir une agence permanente vouée au développement régional pour les habitants du nord de l'Ontario. FedNor existe actuellement comme programme gouvernemental et relève de la compétence du ministre de l'Industrie et peut essentiellement se faire couper son budget ou encore se le faire complètement retirer sans avertissement. Il s'avère important de noter que lorsque l'ancien gouvernement libéral était au pouvoir, le financement octroyé à FedNor n'avait jamais été menacé d'être éliminé. En effet, en 2005, le gouvernement libéral avait augmenté le financement annuel de la base remis à FedNor à 51,9 millions de dollars. Malheureusement, quand les conservateurs sont arrivés au pouvoir en 2006, ils se sont hâtés d'effectuer une coupure de près de 7 millions de dollars au niveau de financement annuel réservé à FedNor, et ils ont tenté de faire croire aux Canadiens du nord de l'Ontario que, d'une certaine façon, ils recevraient plus d'argent que jamais auparavant. À cette époque, le ministre de l'Industrie avait annoncé que le gouvernement conservateur prolongerait la durée du programme FedNor pendant 5 ans, mais que celui-ci recevrait un budget annuel réduit de 45,5 millions de dollars, ce qui signifiait une perte de 6,4 millions de dollars pour le programme. In an attempt to justify this 13% budget cut, the minister claimed incorrectly that the 2005 FedNor budget was set at $45.5 million, with an additional $6 million going to the new Northern Ontario School of Medicine. In fact, government records clearly show that the $6 million provided for research facilities and equipment at the school in 2005 was above and beyond the $51.9 million annual budget guaranteed by the Liberal government. Well, Madam Speaker, my constituents and residents through the region were not fooled by Minister's shell game. Rather, the people of Northern Ontario felt betrayed by the Conservatives, and with good reason. You see, the Conservatives are masterful at playing politics of division. They love to pit different regions across the country against one another, rather than offering everyone an equal opportunity to succeed. As the Member of Parliament for Nipissing-Timiskaming and a resident of Northern Ontario, I can tell you that FedNor is of tremendous value to the people of the area. This funding is essential in creating jobs and strengthening our regional economy. The cuts speak volumes to the priorities of the Conservative government and their vision for the future of Canada. In 2005, the Northern Ontario Liberal Caucus worked very hard to raise FedNor's stable base funding to ensure that FedNor could undertake longer-term strategies for the development and growth of Northern Ontario economy. Mr. Speaker, my Liberal colleagues and I continue to recognize the importance of making sound investments in people, knowledge, modern infrastructure, and a sound and efficient financial sector in order to provide the foundation for global success. We are also committed to ensuring that the people of Northern Ontario are given every opportunity to develop and maintain a strong regional economy, as well as diversify and strengthen their employment base. Bill C-309 is a critical means to that end. It's worth noting that other regions of the country have regional economic development agencies which report directly to a minister of the Crown, thus serving their needs. I firmly believe that the residents of Northern Ontario deserve the same privileges and services that these agencies provide to other Canadians. The Conservatives will argue that the establishment of a permanent FedNor agency will do nothing more than create more bureaucracy and cost more to administer the existing program. For instance, in the remarks during the second reading of the bill, the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration made a bogus claim that claimed establishing a permanent regional development agency for Northern Ontario would limit FedNor's ability to contribute to other economic development initiatives in Northern and rural Ontario.
That's crazy.
Let's pause a moment and reflect on this assertion. Are we really supposed to believe that making FedNor a permanent agency, one that cannot be subjected to cuts or outright termination, would somehow limit the organization's ability to administer necessary funding to projects throughout Northern Ontario? Madam Speaker, the people of Northern Ontario will not be taken for fools by this Conservative government.
Good for them.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the political spectrum, the NDP will argue that the Liberals had the opportunity to establish a permanent FedNor agency back when they were in government, but they had made no effort to do so. Madam Speaker, in 2005, DEC, the provincial economic development counterpart to FedNor in Quebec, was converted from a program to an agency. Now, what happened is, while we were in government, the NDP and the Conservatives teamed up together and brought down the Martin government, killing the opportunity for FedNor to become an agency then, and they also killed many other programs that would have been very beneficial to us and which the Conservative government does not believe in.
It was a bad day, bad time.
Therefore, in light of the substantial FedNor funding cuts that have already been made by the Conservative government, and facing the possibility of more cuts again in the future, we must take action now. Let's begin then by discussing the difference between program and agency, which is a question that is often asked. Technically, the words program and agency have no effect under Canadian law. That said, what separates FedNor from other regional development agencies is that of its counterparts, it has an act of Parliament establishing it as a separate entity and outlining its mandate and powers, while FedNor does not. This legislation means that federal government requires the consent of Parliament to change or alter the agency's powers or its mandate. Currently, FedNor's performance and financial reports are included in a chapter in Industry Canada's reports on plans and priorities and department performance reports. Now, we call it a chapter, Madam Speaker, but really all it is a couple of pages, if that, and it's very meager, very difficult. A separate agency under the Financial Administration Act, FedNor would be required to file detailed financial and performance reports for tabling in Parliament. The reports on plans and priorities would outline the agency's objectives, programs, spending plans, and departmental performance reports, which evaluate whether the objectives have been met and provide details on previous spending. Again, I want to point out that this is not existent with a program. While a separate agency generally requires its own corporate services and communications divisions to provide human resources and public relations support, FedNor already has its corporate services and communications divisions. So, if it was turned into a separate agency, creating these divisions would not be an issue. Mr. Speaker, since my bill was first introduced, it has gained support and endorsement from many municipalities throughout Northern Ontario. They obviously believe that, just as my Liberal colleagues do, and I do, that FedNor should become permanent regional economic development agency. La question que mes électeurs continuent à me poser est pourquoi les conservateurs abandonnent-ils le nord de l'Ontario? Nous comptons déjà plusieurs agences de développement régional en fonction de l'Agence de développement économique du Canada pour la région du Québec, la diversification de l'économie de l'Ouest Canada et l'Agence de promotion économique du Canada Atlantique. La création des deux autres agences a été annoncée dans le budget 2009, l'Agence fédérale de développement économique pour le sud de l'Ontario, ainsi qu'une nouvelle agence de développement économique régional pour le nord du pays. Chaque région du pays comporte maintenant sa propre agence de développement régional, toutes sauf la région du nord de l'Ontario. In the case of Northern Ontario, it's left up to the Minister of Industry to look after FedNor. As it happens, the minister in question hails from Toronto. which further demonstrates how out of touch this Conservative government really is when it comes to addressing the needs of Northern Ontarians. Northern Ontario is indeed a unique region that represents unique economic challenges. Residents in Northern Ontario aren't looking for government handouts. We are looking for funding that will help us build infrastructure that will allow us to maintain the same standards as large urban centres. Bill C-309 isn't about creating more bureaucracy. This bill is about having people on the ground who live and work in the region, who are best able to assist municipalities, rural communities, and not-for-profit organizations to build a robust local economy. C-309 is about equality, fairness, and a strong and sustainable Northern Ontario. It's about Northern Ontario standing up and being treated as equals in Canada. Mr. Speaker, in my previous remarks on Bill C-309, I emphasized the fact that Canada is not one homogeneous entity. Different regions face different challenges. They have different growth rates, different strengths, different weaknesses. Each region is unique and deserves special attention so that it can flourish and allow its residents to provide their families and to provide for their families and to live a decent and prosperous life. I still believe that the Canadian federal government and regional economic development agencies in particular have an important role to play in terms of maximizing the potential of each geographic region in our country. In order to maximize the potential of Northern Ontario in particular, we must focus on future investments. I highlight this because as a separate agency under the Financial Administration Act, FedNor would be required to file detailed financial and performance reports for tabling in Parliament. Madam Speaker, I have asked the Minister for these reports a number of times while in Industry Committee, and each time he promises them, but they never come because he doesn't want to show them. He doesn't want to show what he's been doing with FedNor.
That's how they do business.
The reports on plans and priorities would outline the agency's objectives, program spending plans, and departmental performance reports, which evaluate whether the objectives have been met and provide the details of previous spending. Being able to review the agency's estimates would allow us as parliamentarians to take a closer look at the list of proposed funding and activities that are being planned and managed for the upcoming year, so that we have a better understanding of where the economic development is being directed. As it stands, currently, because FedNor is a program and not an agency, the spending details become lost as part of the budget of Industry Canada. This means that there is very little spending information and no breakdown of activities. In fact, if you take the time to visit the existing FedNor site, Madam Speaker, you'll notice that only certain spending announcements are posted, and those that are contain very little in the terms of specific project details. Furthermore, unlike an agency, reports for a program can only be seen at year end. Because it takes another 6 to 8 months before those numbers for those numbers to be published, that means that it's generally a full year or more before we are really able to assess whether or not the investments that have been made are effective and being directed in the right areas. The example I've used before is that it's much like driving a car and concentrating on the rearview mirror. Madam Speaker, we cannot really look to the future when all we can see is behind us. With regional economic development, we really have to look ahead and see where we will go and where we want to go in order to find the kind of programs that will get us to that place. Interestingly, Madam Speaker, the Conservatives are the only party that fails to see the logic and usefulness of Bill C-309. It's time they stop treating the people of Northern Ontario like second-class citizens at a time when every region in the country has their own economic development agency. There is absolutely no excuse not to have one for Northern Ontario, where we face so many economic challenges. I would urge the Minister of Industry and his Conservative colleagues to reconsider their opposition to Bill C-309 and give the people of Northern Ontario the support and respect they deserve. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Well, thank you. And I want to say to the member for Nipissing-Timiskaming that this is indeed an excellent bill. You know, it will go a long ways to, as he said in his closing remarks, the federal government not treating Northern Ontario like a second-class citizen, actually treating us like a colony. The provincial and federal government, I think, have to get beyond that and give us the resources and the support needed to live up to the potential that we think we have. The only question I have for him is he will know that I consulted widely on this bill at one time, and at that time, one of the questions that I was asking was, how do we define Northern Ontario? And actually the only difference in a bill that I was championing a couple of years ago and his bill, I think, is this definition. I was suggesting that Northern Ontario starts and ends at the French River and the Mattawa River. He has chosen to include Parry Sound Muskoka in the catchment area that would be affected by this bill if it went forward. And I just want to ask him why he would have made that decision.
The Honourable Member for Nipissing-Timiskaming.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member and all his consultation that he has done on this bill. I know he has been a great proponent of this bill. And when we look at why we have included Parry Sound Muskoka, you know, it's included now in the region, and there was really no reason to change it. You know, when we look at economic development, it's not about pitting one region against another. And I know the previous bill that the member brought up basically separated Parry Sound Muskoka from the rest of Northern Ontario. I leave that to the Conservatives. They can start wars. What this is about, it's about economic development. We need help. When we need help, it goes where it's needed, not to somebody's preferences, not somebody who says, well, let's pit one region against another. And I know the Honourable Member means well, and he put this, a bill very similar to this previously, but it was pitting one part of Ontario, Northern Ontario, to another. This is about working together, not working against each other and using our resources to bring each other down. We have to build together, Madam Speaker.
Je pense que c'est à zéro, mais je pense qu'il reste à peu près 2 minutes et demie. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour, a brief question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm delighted to have a chance to speak on this bill later. I have a question for my colleague, the hard-working member from Nipissing-Timiskaming. On this bill, I've heard criticism from the government that seems patently absurd on the face of it, and I wonder if you'd comment on the idea that by creating this new agency that it has been asserted by the government that it might increase costs and lead to a loss of jobs. And it doesn't make any sense to me, and I wonder if he'd comment on that.
The Honourable Member for Nipissing-Timiskaming.
Certainly, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my Honourable Member for the support on this bill. And he understands, because he comes from Eastern Canada, they understand what a difference Alcoa makes over there. And one of the assertions that's being made by the Conservatives is that the cost will go through the roof. Well, Madam Speaker, that can't be further from the truth. All the setups, all the organization, the HR, the communications, that's already there. All the areas are already in place. The only difference is that the minister can come into this and wipe it out without consulting Parliament. He can change the funding. He can pork barrel and put it into his riding. He can do whatever he wants with this. This is a play toy for the minister, and we have to stop that. That's something that has to stop, and that's where an agency will at least control what the minister does with those funds.
Well, the minister wouldn't do that.
Questions and comments? L'Honourable Député d'Algoma, Manitou and Kapuskasing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as my previous colleague had mentioned, that this is actually basically the bill that he had tabled in the House, and we certainly do support this bill. And we know, I mean, the member actually mentioned a while ago how the NDP brought down the government, but really they brought themselves down. And it was the people of Canada who actually decided that they didn't want the Liberals there. And they have a long record of failing to deliver on on much of what they propose. And I know this for a fact. And, you know, if we had a response of FedNor, and this is why we actually support this, then Horn-Payne's town centre probably wouldn't be in the position that it is right now, closed to the public. I mean, as opposed to having a functioning town center complex, Hornpain got a white elephant. And I'm just wondering whether or not the member is concerned that once this bill passes, whether or not the unelected, unaccountable Senate will actually see fit to pass it. Thank you.
The honourable member for Nipissing-Timiskaming.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In spite of what she says or some of the comments she made, I want to thank her for her support. And that is a fear that we really do have, is that if this bill does make it, and there's no guarantee that it will, because we have a Conservative government who does not want to see fairness for Northern Ontario. And if it ever does make it to the Senate, you know, I don't know what directions the Prime Minister is going to give the Senate, because we know that the Senate basically does what the Prime Minister tells them. It's an unelected Senate, not what the Conservatives had promised, but it is an unelected Senate, and they take their orders from the Prime Minister's or the Prime Minister's office. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable parliamentary